We're going to start. You're in the library. I'm the library director, so I'm going to say hello. Welcome. And I'm really interested. I'm really enthusiastic about this. Textile Hive has been a fascinating database for our inclusion in the library's list, and I'm happy that we could have Alberta. I'm sorry. Andrea. I'm sorry about that. Andrea and Cal up here. Marcia, why don't you, before I make any more mistakes, why don't you go ahead and say some more words?
Well, let me also say welcome. We're happy to have Andrea to have you back on campus and Caleb to have you with us for the first time on campus. We had a little bit of a busy morning with a quick tour, both of our facilities and then over at the Collection and Design Center. So very excited to have you both. Andrea and I have known each other for decades. And some of my colleagues from my former corporate days are here in the audience as well, and they've also known her that long. So one quick story, Andrea Aranow had the most amazing historic textiles, and she sourced them globally, and we as a corporation would purchase things for inspiration. So on one of my visits to her studio, I came back and my boss said to me, "How did you do?" And I said, "I did great. I bought a design, I rented a design, and I borrowed a design." And he said, wait, you borrowed something and you rented something? I said, "She's very flexible, very fluid." So, and I can think back to particular textiles that ended up in our corporate collection as a result of Andrea's expertise and her global understanding of textiles and textile design. So, Andrea and Caleb, I'm going to turn it over to you and let you talk about Textile Hive.
Great, thanks. Do you want to adjust the lights?
Who is near the lights? Where are the lights? Ah.
Thanks for being here. I'm visiting from nearby New York City, where I continue to live. Caleb's here from Portland, Oregon, where the whole archive is now located. And I'm going to do the first part of this to tell you how I assembled this original collection, which turned into 40,000 textile swatches and artwork. And Caleb will then continue with what happened afterwards. So in my case, I never studied textiles or design, but I grew up sewing in Western Massachusetts. Spent a great deal of time deliberating over 39-cent a yard cotton conversationals when I was a kid, and worked with my mother, who was a knitter and really good at hand sewing. Having said that, I sewed my own clothes. It was a question of being able to afford what I wanted, but more and more, I was very particular about what I wanted to wear. So I continued sewing with fabric during grade school, middle school. In high school, I added suede and leather, which were available from jobbers in Boston. At that time, Boston was the center of the shoe trade, so the leftover skins ended up there, and I bought some skins. By college, I started making leather clothes. I was studying cultural history. I went through those 4 years. I got a BA in cultural history, but really what I was concentrating on was making leather clothes. Fast forward, finally finished college, rushed off to the East Village in New York. And that was a very exciting time. I'm not going to say anything about my age, but it was the late 60s. There was a lot going on in the East Village in New York. And I tried to do some more custom clothes out of my living space, but my boyfriend thought that 2 sewing machines was a bit too much. So he said, around the corner there's an empty shop front. Not that I'm suggesting that you would want to open a boutique there, but there is this shop front with a window. East 9th Street, 1969. I started doing suede clothes, and then I bought snakeskins for applique. But it was kind of a trendy neighborhood, and this musician came in one day and said, well, that's nice for applique, but I want a whole suit out of snakeskin. So the picture of Colette wearing these snakeskin pants on the left is demonstrating the very first pair that I ever made in patchwork snakeskin. And that was a special order for Jimi Hendrix. And things continued from there. Flashy clothes for people who wanted to be seen. And, oops, sorry. Yeah, Miles Davis was one of the clients. That's a lesson in how to use the camera. And we used snakeskin. We did only one runway show in those years, but it was fun. We used leather. It was hippie beads. You know about this period. And yeah, that was part of a suit. Sometimes the clients would come in with their own ideas. Always the clothes were made custom. So we'd work up a sketch, then we'd do a fitting with muslin, and then eventually we'd cut the real muslin, sew all the pieces of skin onto the muslin, and finally construct the clothes. So my part in this process was mostly about collaging the colors and the shapes for the surface of the garments. That's what I loved. Sorry, I can't do this well. One of the last pieces I did in this period was for a packaging designer who'd become quite a good friend. And she said, Andrea, I know your best friend is Lucky Strike, so please make me a Lucky Strike jacket. And this is what I made her. And it recently came back into my possession and was part of a show last year at the Museum of the City of New York. So there came a time after about 3 or 4 years of this crazy life in New York that I went on vacation to Peru. And it was nice and quiet and mountainous and clean and safe and cheap. And in quick order, I came back to the East Village and I closed up that Dakota Transit store and moved to Peru with my older son, who was about this age. And yeah, it was a lot of lessons for me. I ended up staying 5 years in Peru. It was where I first came across spinning, first came across hand weaving, first came across costumes that were not cut and sewn, but they were woven to size and used as is, such as this manta on the right and the ponchos. And not to say that people didn't dress. This is a bachelor at a weekend market. And bachelor, I mean, there were a lot of very cool accessories made for the men. But to look really good and advertise that you were available, you needed some fresh flowers in your hatband. And that's who we wanted to impress, a girl like that, also with fresh flowers. Yeah, I had a lot to learn about textiles, from cutting and sewing to actually handling the fiber, doing the dye, and having loads of time to invest. So this was by the side of the road, preparing the yarn, chewing the coca, caring for the kids. It all was of a piece. And we ended up living in a village that was not so rural as the preceding picture, but incorporated a lot of the Spanish elements of dress, like the crochet and the style of blouses, into a wardrobe that was partly hand-woven and partly constructed. Close up on the left is called a garter, a man's garter, tied up at the bottom of his pants leg, called a watana. And you can see the detail in this backstrap weaving. Typically it fell to the oldest person in the family, who kind of guarded the house and sat outside in the sun working on this while the family was tending to the animals in the pastures. In Peru, a lot of the weaving is backstrap weaving. Mostly it was done in two pieces with just a center seam with the opening left for the head. But in one region in the north, they worked on very, very long warps, as in this photograph, and then cut that into 4 pieces. So it's a tremendous amount of weight this lady's pulling on her back. And of course, really beautiful product. These are just a few of the ponchos on the left. The brown was often achieved using nogal, which is from walnut, quite an easy dye and readily available. This is another backstrap weaver, and he's making a carrying cloth, which tended to be much more complicated in coloring and spacing than the ponchos. And that's what it looks like when in use. It could carry babies, it could carry groceries, but it was very tightly spun and tightly woven, warp-faced carrying cloth. And then this is the type of manta that my neighbors used when they were celebrating at fiestas. All the straight lines and the rigid geometry of everyday clothes went out the window for just exuberance and festivities and dance costumes.
That was embroidered?
That was embroidered. So after some years, we left Peru. We moved to London for a couple of years, and from London, I started studying collections in museums and libraries and hit out for several areas of Asia. I visited Laos, I visited Afghanistan, short trips in Burma. And while in Burma, I heard that China was just beginning to open for individual travel, and I was dying to see what had been behind these locked doors for ages. So in about 1981, I took a short trip to China with my kids, and then I realized this is very complicated, studying these native costumes in China. And I was particularly interested there in what were known as the minority people of China, 96 different groups of languages within China itself, mostly around the perimeters, southern and western perimeters. So with my 2 kids, we took a year off from formal study, and in 83, 84, we just traveled around China for a whole year. This young man here was about 6, I think, and his brother 12. They were not always that pleased with the trip, but more on that later. Yeah, in China, most of the people I visited worked with cotton or with bast fibers rather than wool, and many of them did spectacular embroidery. So this is just going to be a little look at what it was like. Some costumes, some scenery, some astonished faces, because in these villages, they'd never seen Western people, particularly of the small size, playing with toys. So as curious as I was about them, they were equally curious about my kids, and they crept up, and yeah, we started. This is from Hainan Island. The last picture was from a province called Guizhou, Miao people. This is a Lee lady from Hainan Island in the South China Sea. As you can note on her legs, they had a tattoo tradition. These people, I think, were in long contact with other island cultures more than other mainland cultures. And they did incredible weaving. The piece on the right is a detail of a skirt. And she's holding skirts that she wanted me to see. Once people got the idea that I loved their work and wanted to see it, yeah, it all came out. In another part of Hainan Island, they were still doing ikat with indigo. So these are the warp threads bound off for ikat. And this is what it looked like. They braced, also a backstrap loom, but they braced their loom against their feet. And that's what, well, this is an old skirt, but that's what they achieved. Again, a sarong shape. And I was lucky enough to see a sampler, too, of weaving patterns. The embroidery done, this is a different group, also on Hainan Island. The embroidery is all counted thread embroidery. They don't draw this out. They count the threads of the ground cloth and insert their needle in the right place. It's just amazing. And they got me dressed up too, just to let me know that I look like a woman as well. And the last long stay that I'm going to show you about is in Japan with these years. Direct from the backwoods in China, we went into super polished Japan. It was quite a transition. And I visited many people in Japan, many makers, but I went there initially with the quest of looking at modern kimono. I had seen beautiful historic kimono in many Western collections, both in Europe and the States, but I hadn't seen any contemporary design. And I realized that people were still wearing kimono, and they didn't have to be super expensive. It was available on a popular level, and I wanted to see what that was all about. So I had by then collected and sold quite a few textile collections to museums in both Europe and the States. I arrived in Japan with a handful of introductions and references, hoping to find an advisor at a university who would talk to me or lead me through my research on modern kimono design. Much to my surprise, they uniformly told me that modern kimono was not a good subject, and if I wanted to study kimono, I better look at 17th century material, and thank you for coming by. See you again. So with that kind of dismissal, I began my study of modern kimono design just the same as I had in other places, which is buying a sample, having it in hand, showing it to someone and saying, what is this, where's it from, na. And I had a lot of very, very wonderful volunteer translators helping me. All kinds of people pitched in. And finally, I had a visit from the keeper of the Japanese department at the British Museum who said, Andrea, we love what you're doing. We don't just want to be collecting antiquities. We like collecting material close to the date of manufacture with lots of information, and we're going to support you. So from then, I built a small collection of about 75 pieces for the British Museum as examples of modern kimono, and I did that for 3 years, which paid the school bill, considerable school bill for the American school in Japan, and I learned so much. This is one of the pieces that I came across, and you'll see many pieces of Japanese artwork in Textile Hive. Caleb's going to tell you more about the contents of Textile Hive, but let me just mention in passing that I believe about 20% of the 40,000 items are from Japan. Because having arrived there and begun a study, I just couldn't give it up. So even after I moved back to the States, I kept returning to Japan for a month every year ever since. So learning more and more. This is a piece of original artwork for kimono pattern from about 1960. This is a studio where they were using stencils. This is another original design on washi paper painted with ink about 1910. This is a swatch of the very first garment I ever bought when I arrived in Japan. As usual, I didn't know anything about it, so my attraction to purchasing this yukata made of cotton was just an emotional, personal, I love it. I love it, I'll buy it, I'll find out more about it later, which is the way my whole collection was built, one piece at a time, particularly if it raised a question in my mind about the technique or about what the design represented or any sort of question. I wanted to have it in hand for my research. So I began with a visual attraction, and 40,000 items later, yeah, some of the questions have been answered. So this was done on cotton. It's called a yukata. It's a summer garment that can be worn in the house or in the neighborhood. And it's resist dyed with indigo. And I hope you like it. These are some stencils. Actually, these were used not for kimono fabric, but these were used probably for shop signs. But stencil, we all know this technique. It's used in Japan too. This is one of the very beautiful swatches from Textile Hive. Tribute to Marcia, because I know she likes woven structure a little bit.
Yeah, just a little.
So this, in fact, is a swatch from an obi, one of the wide belts that is worn over the kimono. And they tend to be heavier, of a heavier cloth than the kimono. There's just such a vast number that I'll have to come another time when you want to know all about Japanese cloth, and we'll talk more. Another one of my favorites from Textile Hive, this resist technique is called shibori, and this is a panel. Japanese kimono cloth is of a uniform width, about 13 or 14 inches. And then it's seamed. So you have one width for the sleeve, left front, right front, and the other sleeve. All told, this is a pretty bold pattern for this size of garment, and it's unusual that shibori is this large. So shibori is done by resisting the areas you want to keep white and dipping it in the blue, which probably is not real indigo in this case, but I was very taken with the layout and the pattern. So in 1987, having finished 15 years abroad, I returned to New York City, and I had a lot of swatches from Japan because I'd been gathering them just to study. But my designer friends in New York said, these are really great. We don't need to buy kimonos. Couldn't we use swatches as inspirations for designs? So I opened a little studio at Union Square with mostly Japanese swatches, ethnic swatches from here and there, and nothing Western at all. So I started showing designs. First, I worked with the contract market who liked the little Japanese wovens, And then I wanted to move into traditional residential markets. So I started collecting vintage and antique swatches in both America and Europe. And that was pretty interesting. And about 6 years into that, I decided I wanted a little more varied audience than just home furnishings. So I began doing shows and collections for apparel. But the format was the same. Clients would come to, yes, collecting, heavy collecting, many, many years. It's surprising I still have a back left. Clients would come with some sort of an idea of what they wanted. Usually verbal, but sometimes they'd send tear sheets. That was before internet days. And so the challenge was in 45 minutes or an hour to find exactly which designs would help them most. It was known as design inspiration. And it was a challenge, and it's one that Caleb's taken up very well, because a lot of designers are quite good visually, not so good historically. When they said they wanted an Art Deco print, it was anybody's guess what they had in mind. We got good at this. That's what my studio looked like, my last studio, which was at Broadway and 26th Street in New York. Lots and lots, very neatly arranged. So clients would come in there. We would also show at Decosit in Belgium, in Indigo in Paris twice a year. We did shows in New York. But many times people came to the studio. I like to go and visit people at their place too. It was a mix, but very active. And after years and years and years, I thought maybe I should try something else. So I was prepared to close the showroom in New York and move on. This is a show booth we did at a trade show. We would set up next to the studios who were producing new artwork. So we were not the only studio showing vintage and antique, but we were among the few. Most people were creating artwork. And we'd send out little friendly advertising for our shows. And anybody could turn up there. We had clients from Europe, from Japan, from America, and sometimes from South America. And the stories varied, but it was fun to put them together on the walls. I worked with some wonderful designers, including this fellow on the right, Dries van Noten, one of my favorite clients, because he loves tactile and he loves handmade, and he was just like very calm and thoughtful in his choices. Always a pleasure to work with. So in 2009, after 22 years of doing this, I thought it was probably time to step back. And that's when Caleb stepped forward and said, "Oh, I've been working with you for 5 years now. I have some different ideas about how this collection could be used." So Caleb set up a showroom in Portland. We shipped every single scrap out to Portland, and Caleb set up this beautiful place out in Oregon. Looks somewhat familiar, not as good, but you know. But it included some features that I'll have to admit kind of surpassed my New York location. I'll turn this now to Caleb Sayan. Part B. Thank you.
So my mom is a really hard act to follow. I'm more of a archivist sensibility, although my formal degree is in international and comparative politics, even though I grew up obviously around textiles my whole life. I think I helped my mom. I moved back to New York when I was about 24 and thought I was just going to help my mom with her business for a year or two, but ended up becoming much more involved, and I really enjoyed working with designers, and I was a photographer as well, so there are lots of parts of being in New York and working with her collection and getting to travel that I really enjoyed, but I knew in the long term it wasn't going to be something I could be really passionate about. Our collection was used by some very influential designers, but it was a very small cross-section, and I always felt that our collection could serve a wider purpose, even if that purpose wasn't just commercial. And so I had actually moved out to Portland in 2000, or Vancouver, BC in 2008, and then spent 6 months thinking about what I was going to do next. And what I was really thinking about was working with companies to help them organize archives. I saw the amount of resources they put into collecting and purchasing materials, and I had friends who worked at companies like that, and they said they might use something once and then put it in a drawer, but it was almost thought of as a sunk cost, and I made me a little bit sad because a lot of these textiles had deep stories behind them, and I felt like especially as things digitally could be organized to help physical kind of collections would be kind of something that would happen in the future. And I think this all predates Instagram, and Pinterest came along a few years after I began our project, but this was pretty much close to day zero for us. So I was living in Vancouver, BC. My mom said she was closing down the studio. And I proposed the idea of digitizing our collection, ultimately with the goal of placing it and finding a permanent home. So it wasn't my intention to create a new business, but to find alternative ways other than just selling the materials to have the collection used. And so I had about 2 weeks to find a place to live in an office space. This is and then my mom needed an address to send the stuff, so this is how it arrived in bundles. These were her categories. Some of them are kind of esoteric and very particular to the fashion and textile kind of industry, but it was really important that we kept my mom's sense of organization. So even now, how the items are organized in Portland is the same way she classified them, and we have all that information in our metadata as well. So this slide kind of boils down or condenses, I don't know, three or 3.5 years of work. It was kind of my original conception for what became Textile Hive. But at the center really was both my mother and the physical collection. And our collection differed from many museum collections in that one person collected it. So it was not a collection of collections. So we had a lot of first account information. And I think one thing that makes our collection so special is that it's one person's perspective, and my mom had a very particular way of looking at design, and as she was collecting things, she kind of systematically went through it. And so in some ways, she's very reactive, almost impulsive, but when you look at the broad scope of her work, you can also really appreciate her thoroughness and just veracity. And I think from hearing her talk, you probably get a sense that she's not a typical person. And I grew up, so I arrived on the scene, I was born in New York, but we lived in Peru, and then England and Japan, and I think I went to an international high school, and so I think that's another part of our collection that is really unique, is that we have 50 countries represented and about 200 years of design history. Prior to starting this project, I looked at a lot of online museum databases. I visited a lot of companies. I really kind of wanted to see kind of what people had done in the past to see, to get an idea of how we might structure our project. And my takeaway was that the digital and the physical sides were always thought as separate entities. They weren't really thought or built holistically as a kind of an integrated collection. And I think in 2009, my feeling was, this collection is about a person. It's about physical, very tactile material, and it needs to kind of be designed so that all the different components kind of fit together. And on the digital side, being able to search and find things was really critical. And we had, having spent 5 years working with designers, I kind of had an idea of how they like to search through things, and it was usually visually based. Sometimes they were interested in the technique or the provenance of something, but oftentimes I'm looking for this this type of object or this type of pattern. And so we developed a half of our taxonomy that was really dealing just with the visual or more subjective kind of terminology. And then I also wanted to include information that museums had, like where it was from, what it was made out of, the creator, if we knew it, and some of these other things. And I think I wanted to allow the user to be able to search or cross-reference both sides of information and not stipulate, well, you should be interested just in what this is as opposed to how it looks. And I wanted people to be able to kind of navigate between the two sides. So it took about, I want to say, 15 months to digitize the 40,000 pieces. So we set up a great workflow. I had a background in imaging, and so this was probably my favorite part of the project, and just really broke it down into what the most efficient way to kind of make this, make the digital representation of this material. And I think the second part was probably one of the more challenging parts, which was cataloging all these pieces. So our project kind of had a reverse pyramid. So we started out, the first part required the most manpower. So we probably had about 15 people, including a lot of part-time interns, helping with the digitization. And then the cataloging, we got down to about 6 people after we developed the taxonomy, which was really kind of challenging. And then the last component was building the software interface of how people would interact with the collection. And again, before building that, we researched. So going into this, I had no aspiration or thought of actually building software. But when it came down to thinking about the type of software that would house our material, after spending so much time digitizing and cataloging everything, I felt like I had a very particular point of view of how it could work, and there wasn't anything close that fit the vision for me as a visual thinker of how I would want to interact with a digital collection. But it was built as a package, so it was never intended just to be a digital tool. It was really intended to be used and to augment the physical collection rather than replace it. Even though during those times when Instagram and Pinterest, the pendulum was totally on the digital side, and people were always enamored at the digital. It was almost like the brand new thing, but it was never kind of the intention to not have people, ultimately handle the fabric. And I think when you're working in a commercial business, you kind of take for granted that you're always, and especially if you're based in New York and in the fashion industry, there's just people that are going to call you. Every week there's someone new. I think being based in Portland, there's a big outerwear kind of ecosystem, but the fashion is not such a big thing. It's kind of growing, and since I moved to Portland, it's much harder. Even commercially, educationally, there's so many amazing things happening that it's really this ability to have people come in and interact. And then also pretty much I just work by myself, so we don't have the ability to have so many people come through. But it's always great when people are just like, I want to touch this or see this. And in our collection, I think since it was a commercial collection, since my mom got so many of these pieces, in flea markets or other sorts of things, it's always been a collection that was made to be accessible. And there's definitely a downside in terms of preservation, but it was, since the collection had been traveling and used in this way, it was for me, it was, at least we're not selling the pieces, and to me, if material isn't being used and handled, what's the point if it's kind of just sitting somewhere that and people don't know that it exists. So Textile Hive was kind of almost a plan B. So it came about in 2014. We had visited various schools and institutions, and everyone said they were interested in using Textile Hive, but no one wanted to take over the physical material. And so I thought, up to this point, we'd continued to support the collection and the archiving project by selling pieces, which I really wanted to stop doing. And so I needed to find another business model to support our collection while we continued to try and place it. And so these are just some of the searches that you can do. We should say that you guys all have access to Textile Hive, so please use it. Contact me if you have any questions, but we don't want this to be a gym membership, something that you have access to and never actually. But one of the reasons we really wanted to come here is that you could get a sense that there's a person behind this collection, and for every image you see, we have on this table, we just have a small amount of the samples, but there is a one-to-one relation that every image there is something we actually house in Portland, and maybe similar to some of the materials that you have in the design center as well, which is another excellent resource that you guys should definitely be taking advantage of. Has it gone through once? I don't want to repeat it if it has. And we also build some visual tools, so you can search by color. You can do a map search and then also a timeline search. And I'll play this video in a second. One of the other unique features is you have the ability to compare two searches or filters side by side, so you can do a visual comparison. And so in this search or video that I'll play is there's a resist stencil ikat technique. Hope I got that right. That was done in France and then was adopted in Japan. So in France, it's called Chiné, and in Japan, it's called Mason. And I wanted to show this example because it's such an interesting, same exact technique, but visually executed so differently, and they're both beautiful, but the ability to see the two different takes on the same technique is something that's great about Textile Hive. And you can compare animal prints from one country, or any sort of filter that you could imagine. So on the right-hand side is the Japanese version, and on the left-hand side is the French version. Oops, I guess I'm just manually making it. Oops. And then this is a slide. So this is a kind of a schematic of our space. But after we did the first iteration of our database, we had some other ideas. So the comparison search was kind of something that we came up with after we had built the prototype for our original database. And since we chose all of the technologies we used and built them ourselves, we really had the ability to add new features. And it's something, it was kind of a difficult decision for us as a small independent organization to build something, but it's also allowed us a lot of flexibility to kind of develop and change things as technology and new ideas have come to us. And so in this view, the user can go through the collection, just how it's physically organized, and then click on a box and then see all that material in the box. Each item also has a barcode and an ID. So as for administering the collection, we just type in the barcode and it shows us where that item is located, so we can put it back or put it together. But I think this theme of being bi-directional and thinking both of the administrative uses and the user-facing kind of interfaces as one is pretty central to kind of at least my philosophy in building an integrated collection. And it's really difficult, I have to say, like, when you walk into our physical space or you walk into the design center, every direction you turn, there's so many objects. Digitally, we're so accustomed to scrolling that even with 200,000 or 40,000, there may be some areas you're interested in, but you quickly can go through them. And so finding different ways to expose or surface material digitally, even with a huge collection such as ours, is really kind of challenging. And I think we have a few different takes, but it's, I think there are definitely other things that you can do. And I think if you went to the design center, you could go back 50 days, look at different things. Digitally, you'd have a hard time going back to something unless it was curated or a new angle or perspective was kind of given to you. In this, so this is just a search, and I wanted to show a piece that we actually brought here. So a search for molas, which are reverse applique textiles that are done in an island in Panama called the San Blas Islands, and we have 19 in our collection. And this search, we also, this mola has a knowledge base entry, which is on the right-hand panel. And I think we've built about 20 of these entries. Most of them have videos as well, but this was kind of an idea to really help contextualize the material. So rather than just looking at images or objects, you could hear an expert talk about some of the cultural and historic areas surrounding it, so so that it could become beyond, a little bit beyond the surface, because I just didn't want this collection to be thought of as a visual, just a visual images. So I probably should have just had my mom talk, but. So this, we have got a great image. You can see a palette, but hearing someone describe the conditions of the people who made it, how they came across it, it adds such an important kind of dimension, and that's something you can't replicate. And once you know, I feel like even in product design, if you're making something commercially, the story is so much more important than it used to be. And especially with things like cultural appropriation that 10 years ago people weren't really talking about. It's such an important thing now. I do think that Textile Hive is a little counterpoint to Pinterest and some of these other objects that are almost detached from the maker or what they originally were. They're beautiful images, but they almost exist as disembodied from kind of what they originally were. And I think it's really hard to do this for every single piece, but we wanted to put the knowledge base out there, which is also on our website and is freely available. And we'd love to collaborate with other institutions and kind of building up this collective knowledge about textiles. So this is the image. You can also see an image which has a ruler. So if you want to get a scale of what the actual size is. In the version that you guys have, there's a watermark. So I apologize for that. It's really, having designed the interface, it kind of pains me to see it. But for this, I wanted to show you kind of the, just the original. And then finally, we have the metadata. which shows the visual information and the objective information. So the visual is on the left and the objective information is on the right. These are all things that you can click on. So if you were curious to see all of the donkeys in the collection, they would come right up. And then at the top is the item number and then also the group. So you could see all the other, the way my mom grouped the collection. So I think after launching Textile Hive, the response was really good. We were still getting used a little commercially, but we found our audience was really educational institutions who had traditionally used databases. But being in Portland, unfortunately, most of the interaction was only digital. And so we really had to find new ways to imagine our collection being used. And when I chose a name for what we were going to call our collection online or our website, I really didn't want to include the word archive because I felt like it had connotations of being stuck in the past or being static or stayed. And my concept is, especially about this collection, and just my mom's attitude about life, is it's alive, it's dynamic, it's changing. It is not something that's stationary. And so Textile Hive, beyond the digital database, we still have to keep people engaged with our materials. And so this video was made. We did a project with these two startup companies. One's called Visu 3D that makes a scanner that can scan textiles, and the other one is called Swatchbook, which is a software company for interacting with 3D materials. And we sent them some of our materials, and they did some cool stuff with it. So this is one. Sorry about the resolution. And it was kind of really eye-opening. There are some things, disturbing aspects to me. I was thinking, it's like, if design goes in this direction, what does it really mean? And so on the left-hand side, we have this piece of European upholstery material. And then in the middle slide, so the swatch is probably 8 inches long and a few inches wide. And they were able to kind of imagine it as a bedspread. And then the other two, and then on the slide on the furthest right, the pattern in her tights, and then also the top is a fabric from our collection. And they were able to pose the model, change things on the fly. And my takeaway was, if I saw this on Instagram, I might not know that this wasn't real. As a designer, I think being able to prototype and imagine what something you're designing may look like without actually having to manufacture something, I think is really kind of appealing. But I think the fact that you could sell an idea, take people's money without actually producing something, and then have to reverse engineer something from a digital representation to a physical side, I think was kind of upsetting or a little disturbing to me in terms of knowing how some people might use that technology. And the other takeaway was the technology really isn't there yet. So this piece has like metallic threads, and when we digitized our collection, we color calibrated everything, and so we got really good, what I thought were lifelike images. But in 3D, it's still requiring a digital artist to spend hours if you want to get something that's like a one-to-one representation. And so I think it's still a few years out till you can say, this is, when I scan this fabric, I'll be able to get all its physical and digital properties to be able to manipulate it in a virtual space. And then this is a classroom visit, and so this is these students are from the Pacific Northwest College of Art, and yeah, we used to have some student visits. I think Marcia brought some of her classes, but this is the more typical type of visit, and we still have some designers coming in, but these are students, and I think it was always my idea that during their formative years of studying design, if they were exposed to all these different types of design and different techniques, what would people make? And so this is the way, I originally envisioned Textile Hive, and oftentimes before a class will come out, the instructor will pick out items digitally for us to pull and then have ready for the classroom to see. And this is something that we just started this spring, but we're teaching seminars now because I realized being able to have people talk and relate the material to people is so critical and important. And so we have 2 different tracks coming up this fall. One's more on the design side, and the other is more about design practices. And then this is the newest thing. So next Monday, Portland is the start of Portland Textile Month, and that's something that I helped kind of organize and build. And so being at my vantage point in Portland, I've come across people from the Weavers Guild, quilters, designers, people who are interested in electronic textiles, all sorts of different people, but I realized that these groups are not interacting with each other, and I felt there was a need, and I kind of stole the idea from New York has a textile month that's been happening for about 3 years, and I like that it's institutions, businesses, and artists, and so I just put something on Instagram that we were thinking about doing it, and it was much more popular than anything we've ever done to promote ourselves. And I think we have 38 events now, events that a large part would have happened, but we built a website that just lists everything that's happening during the month. And I think going forward, for next year with more planning, we can get even more events and really plan things. But my real idea is trying to pair the Weavers Guild with students and really mix the generations. Also, Portland is not known for its cultural diversity. And so one of the great parts of helping to organize this was just meet people who do come from different cultures and have a different cultural textile backgrounds, and who are really interested in sharing their knowledge. This is our artist in residence, who's also a professor at PNCA, so this is something new that we're doing as well. And she's going to have a gallery opening during Portland Textile Month and give a talk in her space. So I think thinking about how to engage people and get people into the space and have different people think and approach our collection is really kind of vital to what we do at Textile Hive. And I think that's everything. I'm just going to pull up. So yeah, it's really easy to create an account. You just click login there, but that's what the website looks like, and it has more information about our collection and our story. Yeah, I think we just want to open up to questions. We have some materials over here, and yeah, thank you for your time.
Have you reached out for your Portland Textile Month for the Surface Design Association?
Not yet, although friends with the woman who used to be the head, or that used to publish. No, someone else. But so our outreach really, Portland Textile Month started 2 months ago, was the original call for action. So we have big plans for next year, but it's been kind of a fly by the seat. Nothing like Textile Hive was a little more planned out, but the idea really resonated with people, and there was some feedback people had was kind of it should be more curated. We really opened it up so anyone could participate if they had an idea for an event and had a venue for it. And that was my instinct to kind of have it be that way, but it was a little bit, we had to put it out there and then see what people wanted to do with it. And so for next year, I think we didn't get any of the local museums involved, so we'd like to get more of those things. And then maybe for five events, really try and pair groups and kind of force them to interact, because I don't know what the hesitation is, but I tried to get people to kind of do one event that related to another, but that didn't really happen in this first year, and it's an idea I think is powerful, and so I think with a little more planning and execution could really be compelling for next year.
Does the collection continue to grow, or is it just, staying?
So my mom, I don't think she'll ever be able to stop collecting. She continues to travel quite a bit. She has her whole, so half her collections are in museums that she collected prior to Textile Hive, and so she's worked with the other material. She sees the design collection as being separate from her ethnographic textile collections. For me, they're both things she collected, so at a certain point we may add some materials from there. But I think our focus now is more curating what we have and finding new ways to use the materials we have, because we have, I'm not sure if the difference between 40,000 and 45,000 would make much of a difference in terms of the usability, but there are certain techniques we have, especially in the Japanese textiles. We have these rain cloth fabrics, and I think there are a lot of design solutions before people had man-made materials that are, so it's almost like it's almost like how people take samples of ice to see how climate change and how things affected. When you look at some of the solutions, and it's much more long-tailed than kind of, what a short-term project would be, but I think if you look at beyond the surface, I think there could be a lot of kind of amazing things, and I'd love to kind of work on some longer-term projects along those lines.
Just something I was thinking, and because of this everything is digitized now.
Yes.
How do you control that somebody will just go on there and look at your fabric and just print it? And is that an issue, or is it a lost cause kind of?
So we have the watermarks. So that's so in some of the examples you could see a little as they were scrolling, but I think that's why I prefer the collection to be at an educational institution or housed somewhere where the commercial, so it has a lot of commercial value, but to me, the cultural significance is more important, and so I would love to not have to watermark things, and but I think the reason we kept the watermarks on is once the genie's out of the bottle, you can't put it back in, and so it wasn't a risk I was willing to take. But I think there's so many images online today. Even if I don't know if someone would go through the trouble, really, to be quite honest. I think maybe a few years ago that was maybe more important, but I think the information we have on each piece and the searchability is actually more valuable than the actual individual images. So yeah, I don't want this to be a one-time thing. Since we have a relationship with you guys, please reach out to us, and I hope my mom can visit visit you again, and if any of you are ever out to Portland, you have an open invitation to stop by Textile Hive.
Where is it in Portland?
It's downtown. If you know where Voodoo Donuts is, it's right around the corner from Voodoo Donuts.
Oh, okay.
I think we'd like to once again thank both Andrea and Aranow.